Welcome to the American Duchess podcast. We want to give a big shout out to Dandy Wellington for his generosity in letting us use his music Greenhouse Stop in each episode. You can find Dandy on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and iTunes, as well as performing in New York City almost every night. All right, now let's get on with the show.
And that was Dandy Wellington with Greenhouse Stop. I just love that song. I just walk around singing that song all the time.
I do too. And then I think of dandy, and then I want to wear bright colors and
heckin' yeah,
live my best dandy life.
Hello, welcome to the American Duchess podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Lauren Stoll.
And I'm the other host, Tabby Cox.
And we are here with Michael Koropisz, who is a fantastic portrait artist who also dresses in Victorian clothing.
Oldie-timey clothing.
Wonderful Mancunian fella. So we are going to talk to him about...
I can see you're going, the accent.
I married a Brit. It's my kryptonite. So I married a Brit from the Wirral, so close to home. Yeah. So we're going to talk to Michael about his art, his fashion, and
artistic dress.
We're kind of like putting together this theme here for this season of podcasts.
I'm really enjoying this theme.
Yeah.
So hi, Michael.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening or good day to you where you are. Yeah,
I was gonna say it's almost basically it's lunchtime for us, but it's evening for you. It's almost bedtime actually.
Yeah, not quite bedtime, but getting there.
All right. So, Michael, we know that you have had some publicity recently. Or by the time she comes out, it might be a few months.
I would say Michael rocketed onto the scene.
He was like, bam!
Yes, hello, here you are.
I'm Michael.
Yes, so you got some press. But please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Michael Koropisz. I'm 24.
Baby.
And I'm an artist. That's my job, portrait painter. What else am I good at? Oh yeah, I'm also a pianist. So I play the piano, but I don't show that one off a lot online. But they're my two main trades that I do. I play the piano at grade 8 standard, and I'm an artist as well. Oh, and a Victorian, apparently. According to the press.
You're actually a time traveler as well. You just came out of the blue police box and you were like, hello, world, welcome.
I think we're going to have a lot to talk about because I am also an artist, and I also play the piano, and I'm sometimes a Victorian, but I'm mediocre. Compared to you, I'm mediocre at all three of those things.
So
portrait painting.
How long have you been working as an artist, Michael?
Yes. Okay, I'll be brief so I don't bore you to death. But I started off painting from a very early age. I was very young. I can't even remember. I've seen old photographs, and I think you're born with something. I'm not saying you're born with a talent, but I think you're born with a brain that either works well with maths and things or with art or things like that. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
My parents really encouraged me, and they bought me oil paints when I was about 4 or 5 years old. We're not wealthy or anything. I think they just saw a lot of potential. So oil paints are quite expensive. So they bought me the whole thing, and I started painting. I was always the person in the class who was a good artist or drawer. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes,
There's always someone in the class who can draw better than others. That was me. Yeah. And then I went into high school, and I had a brilliant art teacher called Mr. Noakes, and he taught me everything about oil painting. He's an oil painter himself, but not a classical painter. He's more modern in a sense. So he's incredible. I'm still friends with him now. And then I went to college. Now, college in Britain is an extension of what I think you have as high school in America. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Do you go up to the age of 18 in America?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, we call it college. It's 2 years from when you're 17 and 18. And I got disqualified from art there because they wanted me to do modern painting. By modern, I'm being very broad here. I hope I don't offend people.
Oh, my PTSD from art school's coming back. So.
But that's what I'm like. So basically what happened is I was painting my traditional oil paintings, not very well, but I was giving it a go. And the art teacher didn't really want to teach. I think she just wanted the wage that came with it. And she wanted everyone doing the same thing. She didn't help anyone or encourage us. And she got everyone painting on newspapers with with gravy, like Browning and stuff, really weird stuff. And it was like splattering paint around. And I said, I don't want to do this. So I got angry and wrote her a horrible email. And then I had the deputy heads come over to my house when I was in my pajamas. I didn't let them in. I disconnected the house phone so they wouldn't call. And I didn't go back to college. And then I got in a lot of trouble and disqualified from art. So then,
but that's so artist of you. Like, that's such an artist thing to do. Like,
then what I did was I decided to still apply for university without telling them. And they saw my portfolio, and they took me on. So I ended up doing a degree in fine art, a degree in art history, and also a teaching degree. Now, after my art degree, it put me off. I think if you study something too much, you can ruin it for yourself. So I didn't want to be an artist. I wanted to be a teacher. Became a secondary school teacher, and then realised I'd rather be an artist because I don't like the I don't like the hard work, like all the paperwork. So I preferred the art idea. So now I started doing supply teaching after I left that, which is where you substitute for a teacher who's ill. And it's regular work. I was always the children's favourite in school. And then I became an artist. And now I paint celebrity portraits only. It's exploded, especially due to the articles. So the articles was a sneaky way of me promoting my art without having to pay for advertising.
Well done. Advertorial, free advertising.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. And I know we're going to sort of veer on to clothing here in a sec, but I mean, everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, I totally relate to that. My degree is in illustration and animation, and the illustrative part of that was incredibly representational. So we were sort of always like at odds with the fine art students on the next floor up because of exactly what you're talking about. I had to take classes where we were painting with beet juice and coffee. And I'm like, what fork is that? Yeah, struggling with that. But it's interesting that your business as a portrait painter has exploded because I see, and I'm sure we can all agree here, our world is absolutely inundated with temporal imagery that appears and then disappears instantly. It's all digital. There's nothing real here anymore. Real media is not a thing that many artists can't even paint in real media. So to have a portrait, it's interesting because I think when you have your portrait painted, and I had my portrait painted by an artist I revere recently, and all through the process, I felt very awkward about it because I thought, this is so vain. You know, what am I doing this for? Like, and yet I clicked a selfie like 30 minutes ago. Like, I will click a selfie and post that on the internet.
I've been experimenting with the concept of self-portraiture and photography, and like by myself.
You don't feel awkward about it.
Oh, I feel hella awkward about it.
Really? Because like selfies are so common today, but to have your portrait painted in real media and pay a living artist for something that will last hundreds and hundreds of years potentially if it's taken care of, it has this totally different feeling that goes with it. And I think people are drawn to the reality of a painted portrait.
Yes.
And maybe that's one of the reasons why your business is exploding, Michael. And I'm stoked about that because for a long time it looked like real art, real media. But what I mean by real, I don't mean to say like digital art isn't real. I mean to say
tangible
art. Seemed like it was sort of going the way of traditional animation, like disappearing. So I'm glad to see. I'm really glad to see that you're like kicking butt on this. Like, it fills me with joy.
Yes, the aim is to kick butt, as you say.
I held myself back.
You know, artists always rebelled. You get artists who rebelled against traditional art, and I don't see anything wrong with it being the other way around. I can rebel against modern art the way I'm doing it. I'm trying to bring back. One thing that I like to preach a lot is not we as in YouTube, I mean, a lot of people seem to live now and they're not aware of history. But you think of all those minds that lived throughout the timeline of history. We can't say that everything we have nowadays is the best it's been. There'll naturally be, so aesthetically, for example, personally, I think, for example, male clothing. I think male clothing reached its peak, in my opinion, in the 19th century, and I think it's died out a lot since then. That's in my opinion.
Suffered, absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree. I think we can argue 1920s versus 1930s versus 1940s versus 1890s versus 1900 versus 19-teens versus 1880s, but I think we can all agree that once the 60s kicked in,
I'm off the boat once we get through the mid 40s and
but it is absolutely. I think I used to talk about this actually a lot at my old job when we would talk about men's clothing, because especially in America, the toxic masculinity that is destroying our society, quite frankly. I'm not going to mince my words there.
It's part of what's destroying our society.
But you can always go down to it. How men would respond to dressing, and that the idea that a manly man, would not care about his clothing is very prevalent in the United States culture, especially in the Midwest and the South where I'm from, and how that has affected men's fashion. Because good luck finding anything other than a pair of chinos and a blue polo. Like, if you want to look nice, that's the uniform. Khakis and a blue polo. But I mean, like, yeah, you're absolutely right. For men's fashion, the past is definitely a lot better, because back then men actually cared about how they looked, and they took it as a sign of self-respect.
Okay, so along the lines of clothing, so when did you decide that dressing in the Victorian fashion was the best way to express yourself?
I can't quite remember. I think I've always been interested in things from the 19th century. Now, people might laugh at me for this. I'm very spiritual, and I don't believe necessarily in past lives, but I'm open to anything. And it's very strange, considering my family are Ukrainian, very different culture to Western culture, and it doesn't draw me to it. And it's the fact that I grew up with parents that have no interest in history whatsoever. History didn't really surround me. I mean, England's historical, but where I live's a bit of a dump. No offense to all the people from Stockport, which is where I'm from. So it's not necessarily the most historic town. It's not like York or London or something.
Yeah.
But I naturally from childhood liked anything from the Victorian era. And I wasn't aware of the Victorian era in a sense. I remember walking past a shop with my mum when I must have been so young, about 4 or 5. And there was a top hat for sale in the window. And I remember begging my mum to buy it. I said, it looks so nice. And my mum, being Ukrainian, she was like, oh, you don't need that. No. She's like, it's rubbish. Like, say it's absolute rubbish. And I said, oh, no, I really want that. And mum bought it for me. And then I saw a waistcoat once. Mum used to drag me around a lot of shops when I was a boy. And I saw a waistcoat in a shop once. And I liked that. And it was Victorian. And then I saw an oil lamp in an antique shop. Mum didn't buy me the oil lamp. We weren't that wealthy. But I've got it now. Do you have my oil lamp? Anyway,
with the lantern and everything on it. Oh, nice.
It all draws me to that period. The music. We used to have loads of CDs at home when I was growing up in the late 90s. And I used to listen to them, mess around with them. And my favourite was Strauss, the composer, Strauss. So I really like 19th century music. It's something that's in me, and I genuinely believe. I went to see a lady who deals with past life experiences, where you meditate and you imagine it. And it came out that I died something like 1895. It came out. Now I was born in 1995. Really weird. And I was French, apparently. So I was a French sort of middle-class gentleman in the Victorian era, apparently, according to this reading. So it's strange.
Well, I believe in past lives, so I am 100% here for this, Michael.
I think a lot of people who are into historic dress, and however they come to that, I was just talking to Chris about this last night. Sometimes you just feel this inexplicable draw to a time and a place. Mine is the Dutch Golden Age. I have no Dutch heritage. I don't know what it is about that, but it's beyond just, oh, cool clothes, I want to dress up.
Yeah.
It's a feeling. It's a weird feeling.
Well, there's at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, which is the city where I'm from, there's actually a medieval room. That it's not medieval, it's probably like Renaissance, like wood paneling, dark 17th century. Now that like the art historian in me, but I remember distinctly, like you, Michael, being like 4 or 5 going to the Speed Art Museum, and I was always slightly terrified of that room because I fully expected to see people in it. Like the veil for like being like one of those things where I was drawn to the room. I wanted to go into the room, but I was terrified of the room.
When did you officially start the full dressing? Because it's sometimes for some people it's quite a transition from modern clothes into that, and sometimes it's a throw all the clothes out, replace everything.
Yeah.
This is who I am now.
When did you burn your t-shirt?
Yes.
I never really wore. It's hard. I didn't just wake up one day like Zach Pinson and say, I'm going to burn my jeans, or whatever he did. I read in his article. I was a bit more, it was phased. I never considered myself to be a costumer, and still don't. I just see them as, you get these costume societies and groups, and they call it costume. I've got nothing against it, but to me, it's just clothes. I just think if it looks nice, wear it. But I think I started when I was about 15 or 16. I never really wore jeans or trainers. I always wore trousers and shirts because I like them. I think they look smart. I like perfection in the human race. Does that make sense?
Do you ever find it? I'm still looking. Just kidding.
But I know it's sort of, when I started to work, I could afford these clothes. And the first thing I bought was a frock coat from the 1890s. I've still got it. It's my favourite coat. I wore it in my last article with the press. I don't know if you see, it's got this lovely hourglass shape like that, at the hips. And then, but I didn't really wear it with the winged collar, detachable collars or anything. I just wore it with the scarf. And then I discovered that men wore detachable collars in the Victorian era, which isn't that common knowledge outside of the costuming community. So I didn't know that. And then I discovered it. I bought a load of lovely collars and thought, oh, they look nice. And because I was a teacher at that time, a bit later when I started wearing that, I just wore them to school. And the children loved it. There was a trend where the children all bought pocket watches just because they wanted to look like me. They called me Mr. K.
Yeah.
And they all said,
oh my God. So
all
cute.
so proud. And it was like a trend. They all bought different pocket watches and things, and they'd wear them to school. And the teachers were like, wow, what do you do to the children that they love you so much?
That's amazing.
I'm just the time traveling doctor painter.
And that's wonderful, because when I was in what we call middle school here, so like this, I was
6th, 7th, and 8th, so age 11 to 14, basically.
Yeah. There was a teacher who, he had to have been a reenactor. I've talked about him before, Mr. Harris. And when he did the Western American history units, he would decorate the inside of his room like a saloon, wood paneling and animal parts and stuff on the walls. That sounded weird. And he would dress as a Rough Rider, like Teddy Roosevelt. He was not my teacher. I had Mrs. Hines, bless her heart, but she just couldn't compete. And so I was down there at Mr. Harris's classroom before my class started every morning, just being in his room, just soaking that all in. And it made this massive impact on me, just his existence, that led to probably the very strange, weird way that what I did with my life. Like, thanks, Mr. Harris. So you're influencing, you do realize that you're influencing so many little babies who are going to go on and they're going to dress like you, man, or they're going to go find their own kind of path.
Yeah, they're going to be confident in knowing that they can embrace their inner eccentric self. Again, calling back our old episode with Zach, and being comfortable being like, I want to wear a pocket watch, or maybe I do want to wear a waistcoat, or maybe I don't want to wear pants, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Going into that whole thing and having you as an example, embracing yourself and what you like and what makes you happy is leading by a wonderful example.
You're a role model.
Yeah.
You're all of these things.
That's really, how exciting. So we talked about this earlier off camera, but so you've been wearing Victorian-esque, at the best you could at your age, and like always kind of leaning towards this Victoriana feel to your wardrobe. And we have a couple episodes that we recorded with Dr. Robin Calvert, who those episodes have come out before this one, because obviously this is just a delightful package about the concept of artistic dress in British art schools. She was talking about how her students now don't feel like there's artistic dress anymore, because social media has basically gotten rid of subcultures, and that, to be goth isn't that unique anymore. To be punk isn't unique anymore. You can find tons of goth and punks on the internet. And it was either you or me that went, they should just start dressing in Victorian clothes. Ha ha, hair flip. And now, then you came out and you had your publicity, and you were actually literally what we were describing, that you went to a British art school. You didn't go to Glasgow. You went to Manchester?
Manchester School of Arts, yes.
Yeah. And you dress this way. You have always dressed this way. And I just love how we go from like Margaret MacDonald and Charles Rennie Mackintosh with their floppy bow ties and their embroidered collars, and now we have you. It's like going backwards. It's kind of like you say, you rebelled against the modern art, and now you're going back
looking into
by
the past.
looking into the past. And so you're embracing it's like artistic dress by going backwards.
Well, do you feel that, I mean, obviously you're interested in classical painting, 19th century art. Do you feel that your fashion is connected to your art, that they kind of go together, or are they separate things?
Absolutely. Because I'm an artist, I don't just wear this for pleasure. It's also a brand. I'm branding myself. If my artwork's Victorian and my paintings cost a fortune, and if someone wants to, I'm not bragging there, I have to explain it. If someone wants to commission an expensive portrait, the last thing they want is the artist turning up wearing a tracksuit, like half woken up with bloodshot eyes going, yeah, okay, like just stand over there. You know what I mean? I'd hate that. It's part of the experience. Mm-hmm. So when I turn up to my sittings, I wear full proper dress, how I should. And I'm very well. I speak better when I have my sitting. I try and be well spoken, polite, and that's generally part of the image. They're not just buying a portrait; they're buying into me and who I am as a brand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But the fashion isn't all an act. It is you. You are. You are into this. You are enjoying it. Yeah. It's not a costume. It's clothing.
Yeah,
exactly. I hate it when people call it costume. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to insult so many people in the costume community, but it's clothing, and all my clothes are pretty much original. Most of that's another thing. I don't reproduce clothes. Not that I'm against that at all. I don't insult you.
No. Everybody kind of does their own thing here. Yeah. For instance, I'm an historic costumer. I like to make oldie-timey clothes. The clothes that I wear on a daily basis are mostly vintage repro, or I have a couple vintage pieces, but I tend not to wear them that much. But I have a vintage style. These are my clothes. I am not wearing a costume. But when I have a costume on, it's a costume. Like I don't wear 18th century clothes like every day. Like it's not my deal.
Like Nicole and I used to.
When you're in costume, and the more that you do it, the more yourself that you feel. But when you first start dressing in costumes, not just clothing, costumes, you act differently. Maybe you're playing a character. Maybe, you go to a Renaissance fair, you speak in Mockney accent and,
Good day.
Good day. Huzzah. You're not being yourself. You don't walk the same way. You don't feel the same. At some point, it shifts. If you wear that kind of stuff all the time, it does shift from being a special thing that you put on to the expression of yourself.
If you love what we do and want to be a part of the American Duchess community, consider becoming a patron over on our Patreon page. We've got perks like early access to podcasts and videos, monthly coupon codes and patterns, a private Facebook group, and swag too. We love our patrons and can't wait for you to join us. Now, back to the show.
So you enjoy dressing in Victorian clothing. You are practicing artistic dress.
So cool.
By being Victorian, and I love this. But with that, you are a 21st century man living in the 21st century world. The articles that have come out about you, they don't always tell the whole story. How do you feel about trying to differentiate yourself from the Victorian era with its morals and mores and social and etiquette issues? And there are some big issues in that era versus just enjoying the aesthetic of the time period.
Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, firstly, you mentioned, I'm not a Victorian. People seem to think I'm a Victorian, and like I'm ignoring the fact we're in the 21st century. I don't reject anything. I don't reject everything from the 21st century. Like I mentioned briefly, like I mentioned before, I see the timeline of history as a place where I can pick and choose, like a pick and mix. Yes. I don't just follow the. If I look at a time of history and this fashion is my favorite and 19th century art is my favorite, fair enough, that's what I'll go with. My bedroom isn't Victorian, as you can see, it's Georgian, the style. Victorians were more about wallpapers, the arts and crafts movement, clutter, all that. This is fresh, symmetrical, Baroque sort of, well, not Baroque. I'd place it around the year 1790.
Yeah, no, like neoclassical, like Robert Adams style.
That appeals more to me than that Victorian clutter. No offense to the Victorians.
But it's true, though.
They're all dead. They're not going to take offense.
Exactly. I'm not a fan of mess and clutter, so I don't like decor from the Victorian era. I like Georgian decor. So it's that sort of thing. Music too. I'm open to music from the 18th century, 17th century, 19th century, anything. I like ABBA. Nothing wrong with ABBA. You know what I mean? I love ABBA. I'm there on my piano, singing money, 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 loving it. And it's not Victorian, but there's nothing wrong with that. And I pick and choose. So I've gone on a tangent. What was the question?
No, you're right on it. I love what you're saying because I often feel that way too about fashion history is like a pick and mix. We get to choose all the best bits. They don't even have to be put, together all from the same time period. Like, here's some 1920s shoes with a 1940s hat. I think I'll wear a 3-piece suit today, whatever.
Let's move on to portraiture because we have a portrait artist here, Michael, you. And obviously you're new to our community, but because you dress in the Victorian era clothing, in the originals that you acquire, you have automatically been thrown into this group of mostly Ravenclaws, by the way.
Gryffindor. Thank you.
But something we
You're
see.
a Harry Potter fan.
She is.
Yes.
She is.
By the way, 50% of historical costumers are Ravenclaws. I have scientific proof of this. Something we see a lot from people who are not art historians or not artists is when someone's trying to use a portrait as a place of reference for the creation of their historical costumes or clothing. And it's a bit weird, it's a bit unusual. Maybe it's a different cut than what's they normally see, or it's just a more interesting portrait. People automatically try to reject it by saying, artist just made it up.
Artistic license, which drives me insane. But we see it a lot. And even though as we can get in there and say, like, guys, that's not how this works. Like, that's not how art works, especially pre-19th century, like anything before Baudelaire and Impressionism, it was not that way. Like, artists did try to paint from memory. It didn't go well. Artistic license from that period, and this is my opinion, is improving the pose.
Yeah.
You see these really romantic
finishing
poses.
The blemishes.
Yeah, you airbrush out people, adjusting the nose a little bit, because you definitely always need to be flattering your sitter. No collarbones right? But when it comes to clothing and reference, and chime in here at any point, reference is king. It was absolutely drilled into us, like, get reference. Because if you don't have reference, it's really obvious, like you just said.
Yeah.
Changing the color of something, that silk sash was blue, I'm gonna paint it red. Depending on the artist, that can be a little challenging, or it can be really easy because you're dealing with like tones and stuff. But as far as like making up complete suits of clothing, it's not that simple.
No.
What do you think about this, Michael?
No, it's not simple at all. I've got a few secrets about commissions where the sitter didn't sit long enough or well enough or didn't wear the right clothes. I had to get my brother to pose in similar clothing I had to make up over the top. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I can't reveal who they are because these are celebrity commissions, but I've had this problem before where I've had to make up the clothes a bit and it just doesn't work. So I've got to basically buy the suit or the dress or whatever and have it positioned in my studio to work from. So it's pretty impossible to make it up and make it accurate, as Abby was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also the conception. So let's say you're a portrait artist in 1750.
I was like, he is a portrait artist.
In 1750, right? And you're going to make up some clothing. You only have the reference of 1750 and what came before. How exactly are you going to just, no matter, even if you did make it up, it's still going to look like the clothing of your time period. Does that make sense? That's
like, you can't get too far forward in the future. You see this actually in like the Victorian and Edwardian postcards where they're like, life in the 2000s. And people look just like Victorian people, but they're just flying around in like massive balloons.
Or they made the clothing out of like silver taffeta or something.
Yeah.
Like, but they're still in that curvy 1890s silhouette with 1890s hair.
So as a portrait artist, you use your references. What, because you kind of mentioned this, in your ideal situation, like if you could have your sitter at your disposal for as long as you need, and you're not dealing with modern celebrity schedules and kind of trying to work, because that is actually a problem that you're obviously dealing with, is that you're dealing with modern people who don't understand how portrait art works, and you're trying to make it work within the modern world. Like, what is your ideal situation for a portrait as a portrait painter?
Oh, I don't know. I would prefer to paint from life than photographs, and have a long sitting, just a patient person, someone who actually appreciates art. And my favorite thing that's lacking in modern portraiture is the drapery, the fashion. There's no drama in clothing anymore. And I say that boldly. There will be dresses out there that people think have drama. They don't, compared to the Victorian Bustle or, the Bustle dresses where they're draped on the front or anything like that. There's so much fabric and silks and things like that. Nowadays, people turn up for a portrait. Some don't even know. I have to tell people now when they turn up for a sitting, they have to wear their best.
Yeah, best dress. So that's your idea. How long do you need?
Takes me about 4 to 5 months to paint a portrait, but that's doing it in the evenings and things occasionally. If I was to do it in hours, I could probably paint a portrait in about 120 hours.
Would you like a silk sack or a portrait? Take your pick.
I'll take the sack and then get painted.
Excellent plan.
Then I'll have my portrait. So that goes back to the artistic license as well, as you have people showing up for their portraits in any time period wearing their best dress, wearing their maybe it was something that had significance, it was worn for a ball or a formal event, or it's just their most kick-ass like Worth gown. For the artist to then go and just make something up on top of that as a sitter, you would be really pissed off.
Yes, this actually ties into another point that I've made before from a dress historian and an art historian perspective. The concept of art for art's sake, and we've talked about this. But painters, artists were apprenticed, especially if you were a portrait artist, like Jan van Eyck and Holbein. Vigée Lebrun learned from her father. It was through usually an actual very traditional apprenticeship program, which is a trade. It's no different than being a tailor or being a seamstress or a wheelwright or a carpenter. It was a trade just like anything else. The difference is with artists is it was very easy to move up socially, because you interacted with the higher social circles because of the trade that you did. And as a portrait artist, I think, in my opinion, and I don't know if you would agree with me, you are, again, it's going back further, where you're not just throwing paint on a canvas for the sake of expressing your fifis. You're applying scientific tools and skill sets that you had to learn and develop over a long period of time through educational programs.
10,000 bad drawings.
To be able to even do it a little bit, right?
Yeah, I don't vent, I don't express my feelings at all in my artwork. There's no emotion at all.
Yeah.
It's purely a craft. If I don't know what would happen, if you gave me a bucket of paint and said express your emotions to paint on a canvas, I'd probably throw the bucket of paint at the canvas. For me, there's no expression. I don't know if I should say, but I don't really necessarily enjoy it as much as I should. I do it because I'm good at it. I have passion in my music. When I'm writing music and when I'm playing music, I have passion there. So I know what it is to have passion for an art form. With painting, it was always destroyed by teachers and lecturers and people who studied with me. And I was destroyed so much through my art that I was just left with a skill, but no passion for it. In fact, if anything, I have anger when I paint, because I create these grand pieces and all I'm doing is rebelling against all those artists who put me down, whose work is the opposite of what I do. So, and I was never taught. I say my art teacher at high school taught me, he supported me, but actually I'm self-taught. Every technique, lighting, composition came from me studying historical artworks and reading books. And now people are getting very jealous of what I've achieved, but actually I've done it all off my own back with a lot of stress.
So, yeah, absolutely. There's a very big difference between society portraits done for money and the expression. I'm thinking of John Singer Sargent. The Met has a whole room of Sargent. If you read about how Sargent felt about painting certain portraits, it's very interesting, the stories, and they're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous. But you can tell, and several of my art teachers also said this too, you can tell when the painter didn't really want to do or didn't really like the sitter, and when they were a little bit in love with the sitter. Not like relationship, sexual love, but
they enjoy.
You'll know this, Michael. There's always a little bit. There's like the eye or the nose or the eyebrow or something where you just like, this is the most beautiful eye. You fall a little bit in love with some part of it. It's not about the sitter, it's about the art. But there's a big difference between painting something for money as a technician and Sargent's other paintings where he's traveling and he's in Morocco and he's doing these watercolors, and boy, you can tell he was enjoying that because he was painting for himself, not for the money. It's so different. I've worked as an illustrator doing product design and commissions, and it absolutely destroyed my enjoyment of art for a very long time. Yeah. And even now I get a little stressed out when I'm traveling and I sit down to do a watercolor. I get a little bit stressed out about it because of exactly what you're talking about, Michael. That sort of, this isn't a nice thing to talk about. It's people are like, oh yeah, I want to be an artist. I'm like, well, anytime you make your passion your job, I'm struggling with this now, in fact, anytime you make your passion your job, you're going to lose that passion. You're going to lose some of that passion, maybe all of that passion. It's hard to get it back. So it's not always sunshine and rainbows to make your hobby or something that you love into your work. That's my experience, and it sounds like it's a little bit of your experience too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice.
On that note, we have one more question at the end. I'm going to put this man on the spot.
Just the button question. Okay.
Go on.
He's
Are you ready?
Now. He's like, ooh.
You scared? No, I'm just kidding.
I think I already know his answer to this.
I think I do too, but maybe he has to think about it. Let him think on it. Give him a chance. Would you rather paint a lady in a bustle gown or a lady in an 18th century sack or like a robe à la française?
Bustle gown.
Bustle gown.
Of course.
Not even with the like big drapey pleats in the back. No.
Too angular. Are you talking about those 18th century wide-hipped?
Yes.
Monster like that? No, too many angles. I don't like geometry in painting. I like flow.
But what about the bustle angle? Out the back.
That booty.
1880s.
Yeah,
like...
I do like a Singer Sargent style. So with a bustle, at least you can. No, this bustle, I don't have to explain it. There's just so much more flow and fabric, and well, not more fabric, but
possibly more fabric.
On an artistic level, I always use downlight when I paint, and like from that angle, I think the 18th century dresses, what are they called again?
Robes à la française.
Or sack, yeah.
Yeah, they're a bit flat on the front, flat around, but they've got the shape. Whereas a bustle, usually not all. Probably you're going to kill me for this.
I put you on the spot.
From my experience, there's a lot more fabric folding, especially when it's draped around the front. You've got frills and tassels and whatever. So from an artistic perspective,
a little different, but the skirts, absolutely, for bustles.
It's very interesting how you came at that about you instantly went to thinking about how you would light that, and from what angle, and how the forms, because it all comes back to shapes, simple shapes, how the forms would look under that certain types of lighting. That's really interesting. Whereas we're just like fabric, frills, lace. Yeah, but of course, there's fabric, frills, and lace in both of those examples.
All right, so let's bring it down even more specific. 1870s bustles versus 1880s bustles. Go.
Oh, that's very. I don't know if.
I don't know if you know the difference.
In ladies' dress 10 years apart.
Come on, man.
You need to ask Charlotte within my art school. I don't wear bustles personally, ladies.
Not yet. Okay.
So, yeah, Tissot versus Sargent. Let's say that.
That's a hard one. Tissot versus Sargent.
I prefer Sargent.
Good man. I mean, I love them both. They are very different.
I think I like Tissot better.
Tissot painted fashion more Precisely.
So, Michael, this has been an amazing conversation.
Yes,
We've
you are
had
awesome.
I'm glad. I can see you lighting up when you're talking.
Oh, fashion and art.
Well, Michael, this has been the best.
Man,
I've had a great time
talking about art and self-expression and fashion. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you better, and we hope to see lots and lots and lots more from you. Your beautiful art. Please, get out there and take pictures of your fantastic outfits. Don't deprive us of you.
Yeah, don't. And if you ever need a female sitter to practice bustle dress portraiture, let me know.
Or me know. Or her know.
Or her know. Or any of us. Just saying. We're willing volunteers. We've also done artist modeling before.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Long sittings too, 3-4 hour sittings, multiple sittings. So yeah. Okay. Well, that was wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you both. That was really lovely. Thank you so much. Yes, anytime.
All right. And Michael, can you tell people where they can find you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram, Michael_Koropisz. I'm sure my name will be written somewhere. _artist. So that's Instagram. And then my website's michaelkoropisz.com.
Again, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure, and I'm so glad that we were able to get you on the show. And for all of you all listening at home, you can find us on AmericanDuchess.com, blog.AmericanDuchess.com. We are also on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and if you're watching this on YouTube, shockingly, YouTube.
Smash that subscribe button. I said it. That's the first time I've ever said that. Smash it.
Please don't smash it. Don't be so hard on your
Smash
computer.
it indeed.
Just tap it. Double tap. And if you enjoyed what you've listened to or watched, leave us a review. On YouTube, if you have any comments, leave them below. We'll do our best to answer them. And until then, have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.